Thank you. Thanks, Anya, very much. Thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you, Mr. Minister. We have... now we have all the instructions. Oh, no, he's taking them away. We're going to be spontaneous. Thank you for coming.
This guy flew all the way from Israel just to put it over here, and I said, no, thank you.
You're free to go on a hike now.
Just think of it.
It's nice to have that many aides, right? Yeah. Let's jump right in. People want to understand the significance of the Abraham Accords, and that's the stated topic. We're going to range fairly widely because, as all of you know, Minister Gantz is also a candidate for prime minister. In Israel has elections every 2 months, and he's going to be standing in the next 7 or 8 elections. He's going to be running for prime minister, but we'll get there in a minute. It is, for people who've watched the Middle East for a long time, it is still astonishing to realize that Israel has diplomatic relations with countries like Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, and so on, that the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia is still under the table, but everybody knows that there's constructive discourse going on. I would love it for you if you could describe the meaning and the significance of the Abraham Accords, specifically in the context of the coming confrontation with Iran. And I'm making an assumption that there's a coming confrontation, but all indications are that something is coming to a head.
Yes, Jeff, thank you very much. And first and foremost, I'm really happy to be here and to be speaking about the different opportunities and challenges that we have in the Middle East. And when I'm saying we in the Middle East, I mean United States, the Western world, and of course the Middle Eastern countries themselves, vis-a-vis the different challenges. And if I go straight to your questions about the Abraham Accords, and I'm very pleased to be sharing the stage with my friend Abdullah from Bahrain. This is the second time actually we do it. We can continue. I don't know why we have to go back to work sometime, but we could jump from one event to another, right? I mean, that could have been a good idea. However, I think that the Abraham Accords symbols the acceptance of Israel as part of the Middle East. And let me take you to a story by this, because this is all started. And honestly speaking, when we were first established, the first few decades, we were trying to be kicked out from the region. And only after 67-73 war, the reality that Israel is an existing part of the Middle East became to a realization, and it started with Sadat visit. So just imagine yourself, when President Sadat came to Israel at the end of 1977, I was a very young soldier, still in my boot camp training. I was called to secure Sadat convoy when he came to speak his peace speech in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. 40 years later, I'm flying in the very same aircraft to Bahrain as the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel to sign an outbreaking agreement with Bahrain, MOU, a security MOU between us and Bahrain. So first and foremost, just think of it. You know, we look at it at the event of the last 2 years. It's the closing events, hopefully not the last one, of the last 40 years of accepting Israel as part of the region. Those agreements enable us to expand our relations in security aspects, but also in business to business, organizations to organizations, people to people. And of course, we can create a kind of a regional architecture, I would say, between the different countries. There is another segment that came later on, but it's part of it in a way. Israel was transferred from EUCOM to CENTCOM, which enables us, or we use it as a strategic umbrella to coordinate between the different countries in the Middle East. I can tell you that there have been hundreds of visits between officials of defense establishment between the sides, and Israel have participated in more than 10 multinational exercises in the Middle East. Now, if you would ask me that 5 years ago, I would tell you, I think that's not the case. But I'm very happy that the US led this. I'm very happy that we had leaders in all the places that realize this opportunity to do that. I'm very happy that I blocked the threat of annexation of Judea and Samaria, because if we were to annex those areas, I don't think that we could have practically moved forward with Abraham Accords. And I think that currently we are in a better Middle East as we see before. Now, going to your Iran issue, Iran is threatening the other countries as much as it's threatening the state of Israel. Iran is a global challenge. You can see it in Venezuela, you can see it in South Africa, in South America, you can see it in Algeria, you can see it in the entire region. What they do in Lebanon, what they do in Iraq, what they do in Syria, what they do in Yemen. And the Saudis are suffering, and the UAE is suffering from the Iranians, practically speaking, actively speaking, more than Israel suffers from them. So I think that to create an architecture that can cooperate with the freedom of shipment in the seas, or on cyber activities, or air defense, and that kind of things, it's very good. And you rightly said, we have good relations with all the countries around the region. And I hope that down the time, more and more countries will come out and make it out.
If you didn't have the pressure of the existential threat even of Iran, do you think that these Arab countries would have been so quick to make relations with Israel?
I think that those countries have realized that Israel is there to stay. I think those countries have realized that Israel is not a burden, it's an asset. I think they realize the good relations that Israel has with the United States, it's a good bridge to be used. And altogether, we never threatened them while the Iranians do so. So I think they took the right decisions from their own perspective.
One more question about Iran, and I want to go to another aspect of the Abraham Accords. Asking you as Minister of Defense, the Iran talks leading to a deal seem to be on a road to failure. Iran seems closer than ever to nuclearization. Are you prepared to confront Iran alone? And do you think you could set their program back militarily in a significant way?
Yes, this is a serious issue. And speaking worldwide, I would say, we all see Iran's malign activities in the region and elsewhere. Now, they are doing all that without having the nuclear canopy deterrence to support it. Now, just try to figure out the reality. How would they act without using nuclear, but just using the nuclear canopy in all those activities that we are seeing around the region? Secondly, and this is why we should not let it get to nuclear capabilities. And, speaking of Biden's visit, he came and he out loud said that the United States will not allow Iran to become nuclear. And I think that this is a very important strategic statement by him and by any leader of the United States lately. So I think this is very important. But let us be strategically candid, I would say. I'm not aware of any other country in the world that there is another country, in our case Iran, that is calling for its destruction and building the means to do so. And I think that for international reasons, the world should stop it. I think that for regional reasons, the region should be united around it. And I think that we, as Israeli government, as leaders of the Jewish country, have an historical responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen. You know, Jeff, let me, I don't like to do it too often. I come from a Holocaust survivor family. My mother survived Bergen-Belsen. My father was a refugee in Europe. They came to Israel and built it during the Independence War and after that. Israel is not an experiment. Israel is an historic evidence that will always be there, and it's our responsibility to make sure. Now, should we jump to a war at the first opportunity we have? No. Should we be able to conduct military operation to prevent it if needed? The answer is yes. Are we building the ability? Yes. Should we use it as a last case? Yes, and I hope that we will get United States support.
You said you're building the capability? It's not built already?
No, it is, but you know, it's like a screw. You always try to expand it and to advance it and to have better capabilities. And you're not leaning back saying, okay, I have the solution, but you always work on it.
I want to jump back to the Abraham Accord for 1 second, but you mentioned the idea that Israel is the only country under existential threat from a nuclear power or would-be nuclear power. Ukraine is under existential threat from Russia, which is a nuclear power. And as you well know, the Ukrainians, including its Jewish president, want Israel to say much more about Russia and do much more in defense of Ukraine. Why has Israel been so lukewarm in its support of Ukraine when there is so obviously a connection there?
Yeah, so definitely I think we have two strategic lessons learned immediately out of it. You see what happens when a country possesses nuclear capabilities, what are the limitations of acting against it. Secondly, we see from the Ukrainian war, from the war in Ukraine, that every country must be able to protect itself by itself, and this is a second nature for the state of Israel, but not all countries are used to it, and some of them thought that wars are history events and they will never happen, and all of a sudden it did. Israel is definitely on the Western side, Israel is definitely on the Ukrainian side. We are supporting it in all the diplomatic measures. We have supported it with all the humanitarian aid that is possible. Hundreds of tons of equipment went there. We have opened a field hospital that treated more than 6,000 Ukrainians. We have absorbed in Israel dozens of thousands of Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarus that came as a result of this campaign. And we are sending them non-offensive equipment to Ukraine. We do have our operational considerations. We are sharing an aerial border with the Russians above Syria. We are being threatened from our northern front, so we have other calculus that we have to take in our mind, and I would say real politics.
Has Russia threatened you directly?
They're not threatening us directly, but we have to make sure that we have a dialogue connections with them. The former prime minister even tried to use those in order to mitigate between Ukraine and Russia. And we have to deconflict ourselves from them. So this is very tiny situation over there.
Does this realpolitik position bother you as a Jew?
It bothers any war and any loss of civilian lives. You know, militaries are there to protect their countries. And I'm always saying that you do operations when you can, but you go to war when you don't have any other choice. And I hate to see civilians being killed and infrastructure being destroyed. And of course, we even had some horrible event that comes from values of fighting, of how to conduct fighting, etc. So we do all this support, and we will continue to do so. And whenever we can help to mitigate between Ukraine and Russia, we will be very happy to do so.
Let me come back to Abraham Accord for 1 minute. A group of people who are not happy, or at least their political leadership, not happy about the Abraham Accord, are the Palestinians, who feel like they're being left behind by the Abraham Accord. How do you address the two-state solution within the context of the Palestinian complaint that you're bypassing them completely in making relations with other Arab states?
Yeah, first, I'm very happy that the Palestinian issue was not a blocking threshold that blocked those very positive developments as we see in the Middle East. Now, so I'm very happy on that fact. Secondly, I would like to tell you that from a Zionistic perspective, from a Jewish, democratic, and Zionistic perspective, I would like to see a better future between us and the Palestinians. I've met with Abu Mazen myself in the last year 3 times. I am the one who's responsible for the coordination with them. I am the one that is responsible for the measures, the confidence building measures that we are doing with them, and I've conducted in the last 2 years more than 30 measures, different steps that I did with the Palestinians in order to create a better reality. I think that in both sides, and I told it to Abu Mazen when I met with him, I told him, Mr. Abbas, I had a dream that you won't be here. And I'm sure you had the very same dream about me. But guess what? We are both here, and we have to find ways of living one aside another. And I think that the more we invest in strategic dialogue, the more we invest in infrastructure, the more we make sure that there is a security, then there is a stability, and then there is economy, prosperity, I would say. And hopefully we can down the road be able to create what I called a bridging situation. My own phrase to it is 2 entities situation, to create a better positive situation on the ground that will enable us in the future to come to a permanent arrangement between the Palestinian and us, and everybody can take his own words for that description. I want to make sure that Israel stays strong, secure, democratic, and Jewish, and that means that we will have to solve our issues with the Palestinians.
We're going to have time.
And by the way, we need, and we can, and we should take advantage of the countries in the Middle East by itself to support those trends in terms of investing in the Palestinian Authority, countries from the Gulf, etc., and I think we can do that.
Right. We're going to have time for one question probably from the audience, but before that, let me just ask one final question. What is your strategy for defeating your former boss and current rival, Benjamin Netanyahu, for the prime ministership? Because if there's one thing we know about Benjamin Netanyahu, he likes being prime minister and he's good at keeping the job generally.
Yes, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has done a lot for the state of Israel. He's a Zionistic person. He served the country in military service. His brother sacrificed his life for the state of Israel. He himself served as a prime minister, and I don't take it anywhere easily. But I think that his time in the political life of the state of Israel is different now. I think that what happened since I and my friend joined the political arena 3.5 years ago, Netanyahu was blocked. Then when I came to unity government with him due to the COVID situation, I took half of his government. And then I allowed a government of change to come up, which we are now facing, and this is the elections that we are now going. It's going to be our 5th elections in 4 years' time. It's definitely a world record, I would say, political world record. My plan is to build a wide unity government with all segments of the Israeli society to exclude the extreme edges. I don't think that they should set the agenda. I think that the center of government of Israel should set the agenda. I think that increasing unity within the Israeli society is part of our national resilience. It's important for us to be able to cope with external threats, and this is my plan. I exclude no one, basically, and the difference between me and others, that no one excludes me. So I think I have a fair chance to succeed, but we will see whether it's going to be on the 5th election or on the 6th elections or whatever comes.
Keep practicing until you get it right. I have time for one quick question. Please make it in the form, just right here, please make it in the form of a question, and please give us an efficient answer, because we have to cover the entire Middle East in the next 20 minutes too.
I'm Moshe Krieger, and the question is this: the failure of all of the experiences where there has been a negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians has really been because the Palestinians refuse to accept the existence of the Jewish state of Israel. How can there be a positive resolution after that?
It's very much true, and I think it takes serious historical understanding of the importance to take this decision. And some leadership courage, I would say. Because, you know, I think it was Truman who said, President Truman who said, that leadership is the ability to convince people to do the things that deep in their hearts, they know it is the right things to do. And I think that is the case. Most Israelis would not like to control the Palestinians, to govern the Palestinians. All the Israelis don't want to take a security risk of a terror entity over the hills, over the center of Israel, as we have experienced from Gaza, for example. But we do need to move forward and to find ways to politically separate ourselves from the Palestinians. Palestinians understand they need to live their life. Yes, they have difficulties. Yes, they had dreams. Yes, they had hopes, but there is reality. And once they will look into the future and not only speak about the past, and we will have leaders on both sides that will be courageous enough to do that, then I think that all two peoples will eventually support it. What are the alternatives for us? To have a stronger Hamas? Bad alternative. What is the alternative for us? To have one country for two nations? That's a very bad alternative for us as well. There's no way, everyone knows it. They just have to be brave enough to follow what they really understand deep in their heart, as Truman said. I hope it changes one day.
Minister Gantz, thank you very, very much for coming today. I appreciate it. And I'd like to invite our next guest from the Middle East, our next contestant on Middle East Sweepstakes, to come up.